Okay. So if anyone has any backup questions, for if anyone in Madhavan doesn't have any questions, you can just message me. So Gurudev, do you want to get started? Is there anything you want to share before you take questions?
Well, it's nice to be with you. Well, we have a nice group of devotees here still. We had an interesting week with the passing of Bilal Chandra and a nice observance here, and the observance there in North Carolina where you are seemed to be quite nice as well. When I was speaking about Bilal Chandra, I had mentioned towards the beginning of the talk that when I was speaking about his earlier life that he had a son, and then I would come back and connect with that point again at the end. I didn't get around to doing that, but it's worth mentioning that what I wanted to say is that his son became a devotee after 40 years or so. And I met him the last time I was there. Padmanabh Maharaj met him also when he was there. And he seems to have some, bhakti samskars for it, because Dulal, who started the site for my talks, the present one at least, so many talks on there, I guess his son got in touch with him over something, and he directed him towards that. And he listened to my discourse on the Ramananda Samvad, which is a pretty esoteric section of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. In fact, Pujyapat Sridhar Maharaj told us that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur didn't let his disciples read that section along with some other sections. And of course, that was Sridhar Maharaj's favorite section. So you have to understand sometimes the relativity of certain instructions that the guru may give according to time and circumstance. Obviously, he read the Ramananda Samvad, etc. Anyway, it's esoteric. It's instructive. I mean, it's the Bhagavad Gita respoken, so to speak, where Arjuna becomes takes the role of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna takes the role of Arjuna. Krishna asks the questions, and Arjuna, in this case Ramananda Roy, gives the answers. So at any rate, he listened to that, and he was convinced that this was how he should orient himself in terms of meaning and purpose in life. I was inspired by that, and so yeah, he of course tuned into the discourse that the event really, in which I had a discourse concerning his father's passing, and along with his mother and others, and they were inspired. His mother was once living at Vrindavan years ago, where I think he may have been born in Vrindavan or close by. Eric is his name. She had been out of touch for a long time, but apparently the way I spoke about New Vrindavan and events in Bilal's life and so forth, and the life of some others, many others that I referred to, less than ideal circumstances when we find ourselves, even in circumstances that we plugged in that were supposed to be favorable, turned out not to be, and so forth. She got inspired by that as well. He wrote to me about that, Eric, recently. So that's a beautiful part of the story. Forgive me for leaving it out. Eric Kijai. And I think he'll come and visit with me when I return to North Carolina in March for our Purnim festival there. So I heard you got a storm coming there. Is that true?
Like the snowstorm? Yeah. It's still here, kind of. Yeah, we still have power, so that's good. Thanks for asking.
What did you say about power?
I still have power, but I feel like, yeah. So
Ross told me that if I try to get in touch with her over the next 2 days, she might not have power, and that's why she wouldn't respond. So I assumed there was.
Yeah. I wonder if they have more snow over there. But yeah.
She's on the call.
So anyway, okay, that's enough of the introduction for this moment. Let's go ahead and take the questions.
Okay. Yeah, there.
The group here? Probably not. Yes, Zach has a question.
Yeah,
Zach's from North Carolina also. Yes.
So I have a question about kind of interacting with others who are outside of the practice. I noticed sometimes myself, going out of, an environment like this into another environment where bhakti may not be at the forefront of everyone's minds. How to interact in that environment and find maybe bhakti in places that are not there,
Mhm.
and not develop perhaps like a superior mentality. Let's like I'm a devotee, these people are just
Illusion. Yeah. Did you hear the question? Yes. it
I
came-
did. Yeah.
So I assume it came through clearly to everyone. So thanks for the question, Zach. Yeah, difficult. No, it's not so difficult. Of course, it's very much underscored. That is the importance of keeping association that's favorable for bhakti, that will be supportive of our bhakti, and to avoid association that is not favorable or conducive. That said, what constitutes association may mean more than how we think of it at first. I would say that the full idea of association is the exchange of ideas and thoughts and feelings and so forth. And a lot of times, if we're living in an ashram or visiting an ashram, and then we are back in our normal situation, or we have to leave the ashram for something, for some service, then we're in touch with all types of people, maybe relatives, friends, employees, people of the world in general. And just because we bump into them, say hi, are polite, ask them, how's the weather, and so forth, it doesn't really constitute the spirit of what it means to not associate with the ideas that they entertain, and to embrace those ideas. Now, the stronger one is in bhakti, the more one can entertain those ideas and then reply to them, or having heard them, think about them in relation to one's own practice and understand the difference or the shortcomings of them comparatively, and so on and so forth. So when we say don't associate with non-devotees, there's a lot of other things built into that. What kind of a devotee are you? How much do you know? How far along are you on the path? What kind of people who aren't devotees are you going to associate with? Are you going to associate with them to share the ideas with them, or is it just circumstantial? So all those things have to be considered, right? Otherwise, a person like yourself, you say you're living in the ashram or visiting, and then you get a lot of insight, inspiration, and take up the path and so forth, and then have to go elsewhere for whatever reason, then obviously it can be a little bit bewildering. You've been in an environment where everyone's on the same page, and so it's supportive, and suddenly you got this head and heart full of ideas and inspiration and so forth, and it's not exactly the course that everybody wants to sit down to and dine with you about, over, discuss, digest, relish, and so forth. So, how do you interact with them? And I think that you have to interact with people in terms largely of how they want to interact with you, politely, considerate, because you're a devotee, you'd be a kind person, a considerate person, a thoughtful person. And you can be that without having to talk about bhakti to them necessarily, without having to tell them Krishna is God and so on and so forth. What I'm describing is try to be a normal person who has an ideology that he holds or she holds very dear to the heart, but at the same time, it's a bit of a radical ideology and not one that will be shared by the vast majority of people who I may have to interact with sometimes. So I'll interact with them in terms of how I have to interact with them and with their humanness, and be an example of a good human being to them that might possibly, in the course of that interaction, cause them to be inspired by your personhood and inquire from you a little bit about what you're all about. Where have you been? And then there's a small opening. In other words, you associate in such a way as if possible, by your example, to create a window of what we might say a teachable moment. Someone create some curiosity. So that if I don't tell people about bhakti unless they ask me, for the most part, people I have to interact with who aren't devotees, and not many of them ask. I'm just nice to them and just interact with them in terms of how I have to interact and so on and so forth. It's typically not a philosophical discussion. And as I say, if they like you, if they like me, then there may become, if the association is ongoing, there may be an opportunity where by the way you conduct yourself and so forth, that should be exceptional. If you actually have an exceptional worldview, it includes or involves you becoming an exceptional person, a humble person, right? Thoughtful person, kind person, considerate person, open-minded person, and so forth. All these things are attractive, right? So there are aspects of Krishna who's all attractive. So if those aspects show up in you, people be attracted to you, want to associate with you, maybe want to know more, at which point then you can share some of your insight when they've shown an appetite for a little interest in it. As far as not being proud, what do you have to be proud of? Just because you have you think right now that you have found out what life's about, you figured it all out. You turned left and there it was, Krishna consciousness. Well, your faith in that is good. It has to be tested though, with other thoughts, other ideologies. What is the implications of this ideology in depth going forward and so forth. So it's something that you're growing in. You have some initial faith through sadhu sangha. You've met people who are inspired by this, and it's basically by the example of their inspiration that you've inquired further, right? That's how it happened to you. So same way, you can do that to some extent with others, but there's nothing to be proud of. How much do you understand of bhakti? I mean, you've been coming to my classes, some percentage you understand, right? You think you understand a pretty good percentage, but in my experience, after I give a class, often I ask the questions, I realize half the people only understand half of what I'm talking about. And as though I've labored very hard to explain it in great depth and with analogies and so on and so forth. So it's like a language, it takes time really to learn, become fluent in. So you don't have much to be proud about. You only know something about it, a little bit, good amount, enough to feel enthused that this is really worth pursuing, and perhaps more so than anything else you've heard. And I agree with you. But there's much to learn on the one hand, and then learning the theory is one thing, realizing it is a whole other thing, right? So you could have a head full of knowledge of what Gaudiya Vaishnavism is, but does your heart or respond to it? Is it something just as a circling around in your head that you regurgitate whenever you get the opportunity, so that people think you know something and you're living on the false pride that you're some kind of a type of a philosopher, above everybody else, and so on and so forth. That's not a good, that's not what we're doing here. This has to go in the ear and then go into the heart and bring about a change in your life. And that example is how you will teach others. And it will be the measure by which we determine how much you or anyone else, any of us, really knows. How we act will determine how much we know. So that said, even if you do know the philosophy, even if you have allowed it to enter and change your heart, well, of course, if you have, you'll be humble, because you'll know that everything that I know, everything that has all the positives in my life that have come from this, center of which is my own realization of what I am, and my prospect is all a product of the grace of the Vaishnavas, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and mission. That's something I came up with on my own. So I'm proud that I can be a humble member of the Gaudiya Sampradaya. I'm proud to be a humble member. There's nothing to be proud about. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has mandated this. In fact, when he said, "Trinata Pisanijam," one should be more humble than a blade of grass. And with this type of disposition, chant the holy name, and then your course will be straight. But if you let pride get in the way, then that would be very a big obstacle. Pratishta is a word that we use to describe kind of the false pride of thinking you've gone somewhere and you're above others, and you want to bring attention to yourself. No, you're not doing that, but I'm just elaborating on this point. This pride in his teachings to the mind, Raghunath Das Goswami wrote a book, Teaching to the Mind. So, your culture and Krishna consciousness, and you got your mind, to deal with his tricks and so forth. And there, I think he's described Pratishta, this pride, and we see it in devotees. It's very unbecoming, as the
dog-eating woman.
A dog-eating woman.
Dancing, crazy dog-eating Parya dancing in his heart.
Yeah, and another place, perhaps somewhere, I think he's also referred to it as the stool of a pig, and pigs eat stool of other animals. So what must be the stool of a pig? It's very undesirable, this pride in a devotee. It's very much an obstacle. Bhaktivinoda Thakur has described it as the kind of like that attitude is the genesis of all types of other anarthas. So we should avoid that. We have the only thing to be proud of is that we're proud of who Krishna is, who Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is, who our teachers are. We're proud to be humble students of them and recipients of their grace. So those kind of things we should think about that can help us to avoid that pitfall. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. What else?
Sure, send one question.
And excuse me, yeah, I think you should also think, you also realize that you're a devotee, you're devotees, you're also people of this world. You're still very much you're sadhakas, so you're in this in-between space. You're not just ordinary Buddha jivas, anadi Buddha jivas. You're sadhakas, but you're not siddhas. So don't artificially, in some artificial way, but just imagine yourself to be entirely different than everybody else. That you can't even relate to them. Be an ordinary person, talk to them, and so forth. There's still a lot of humanness to you. Now you have to spiritualize your humanness, but you can't just ignore it. Yes, you're not the body, but you can't just ignore it and say, I'm not the body. Therefore, even if it's sick, well, I'm not the body, so I shouldn't do anything about it. Maybe a point where you're like, you're going to leave the world. That's another thing. But I mean, no. And that goes for the mind too. You may have psychological issues that are problems that put you out of balance materially. make it difficult for you to apply yourself in practice. So take an aspirin, see a psychologist or whatever it is. You have to identify with your humanness and with your devotiness. You have to make the balance larger on the devotee side, but that takes time. That takes time. And what I'm saying is that I want you to have an integrate Gaudiya Vaishnavism organically into your life instead of making it this artificial add-on that you put up here, and you got a lot of this jargon and Gaudiya speak that nobody else can understand, and you think they understand it. This reminds me of an example when Prabhupada left the world. I remember that I was in the temple and I learned about that. I had announced it to all the devotees. So the next day, one of the devotees called the newspaper in town and said, "I wanted to let you know that A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada has left the world." He wanted to have a report on it. The guy said, "Where did he go? What are you talking about? Some miracle has happened. He left the world." That's just a phrase like Prabhupada might use, and we would whatever Prabhupada said, we would talk with the same intonation of Prabhupada when we were young and so forth and so on, like broken English, I think it was spiritual. My godbrother, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, once told me that he thought that to express the affirmative spiritually through body language, you would go like this. Yes, yes. Because if you ask Prabhupada, he said, yes, yes, yes. Whereas the material way would be like this, up and down. He said, and then I went to India and I was like, everybody goes, yes, yes, yes. Yes. So you don't want to just have this tack on, so to speak, but you want to integrate your spirituality into your humanness and spiritualize entirely your humanness. And after all, Krishna is human-like, right? So he's completely transcendental and completely human at the same time. So that's your task. If you want to enter the Aprakat Leela, you have to be completely human and completely spiritual at the same time. That's the trick. So I'm sorry, Kishore had a question.
Yeah, it's kind of a different topic. I know someone has a follow-up question just in case to not interrupt the conceptual flow.
If we don't have any follow-up on that here or there, here we have one. Sajjan is raising his hand. I can see it now.
Jai Maharaj, Dandavats.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, it's so, wow, it's so amazing what you just shared, because it really, what you spoke about, association, and especially without pride, is you've really described so much what my life has been like here in Crestone, Colorado since May, since there is no, I believe I'm the only Gaudiya Vaishnava here in the whole town.
Oh.
And of course, with my speaking on the Bhagavatam here to a small group, it's definitely been a very, very impactful and affecting experience being here and offering that service here. And I can't emphasize enough how much being here with you on Sunday mornings is so valuable to me as being my higher association and like that.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, and also what you mentioned about Pratishta, I was wondering, I used to hear a phrase in the community of the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Math community that all Pratishta is given to Baladev or Gurudev, all Kamini to Krishna, the lover of all ladies. and all Kanak is given to Sri Radha or to Sri Lakshmi Devi? How does that go exactly?
I never heard that before, but the obvious theological sense of it is that Balaram is strong and powerful and can curb one's pride, as he did Pralambasura, Dhenukasura. These are big leelas where Balaram is brought to the fore to demonstrate his prowess in dealing with pride. The pride of a jackass, Dhenukasura, for example. And Krishna, of course, is the lover. So, but it's Pratishta, pride. That Balaram take that away is the idea, and kama, lust. Well, Krishna turns. His Rasa Leela is called Kam Vijay, victory over Kam. He converted Cupid. It was a perfect setting. Cupid, young boy in the forest at night with young girls at the full moon. Cupid thought, this is a piece of cake here. We'll go and shoot my arrows, and they'll be finished and exposed before everybody for their infatuation with one another. And of course, Cupid himself got converted. So therefore, Krishna is sometimes called Madan Mohan, who's enchanter of Cupid, right? And then Sri Lakshmi is only the partial expression of Sri Lakshmi. So everybody there. I think this may be something relative to Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Mat. Maybe Mars, you've heard of it elsewhere.
I heard a similar version of that quote, not belonging exclusively to Sri Chaitanya Sangha, which goes something like, all money or Lakshmi belongs to Narayan, all women belong to Krishna, and all the fame belongs to the Guru, maybe in connection with Baladev.
Oh, so it's different ideas, similar ideas.
Yes, I
But
believe originally one devotee asked Guru Maharaj a question: how does one get rid of or avoid Kanak, Kamini, and Pratishta? And so the answer was given that, in this way, that all Kanak is given to, I guess, Radha, but that's what I'm inquiring about. And all Kanak, Kamini for Krishna, and Pratishta for Baladev or Gurudev, like that.
yeah, I mean, you can try it. The idea being that if you find yourself with feelings of Pratishta, you can think of Balaram and ask him to help you, right? If you think, oh, I need money, you can think of Radha and say, what is the wealth of your praying, and how please replace my petty desire for a false idea of wealth with the wealth of the riches of your praying. And if you think of lusty affairs with Krishna, you are Kambijai. So please help me conquer over this. So this is the simple idea that's being expressed there. And obviously it has some power if you can train your mind when these things come up, rather than to be swayed by them, rather than entertain them, rather than to give them an inch by which they will take a mile. And you'll be way down the road later on thinking, what the heck happened? How did I do this? Instead, you catch it you have to nip it at the bud before it flowers. And don't let it have no chance to fruit, right? That is the idea. And this is a positive way of thinking about that, because it's just to do this unto itself, or unto oneself on the basis of one's own mental, intellectual, physical strength. Well, you've been failing at that forever. So bring Krishna into your life, and these are different manifestations of Krishna, Radha, his internal Shakti, Balaram, his elder brother, and so on and so forth. By bringing them into your life simply in this way, by thinking of them, petitioning them, then you have resources beyond that extend beyond your own limited. Your own limited resources are products of the very problems you're trying to get rid of, because your mind, your intellect, your body, these are all products of your own karma. They're not going to help you get out of the karma. So you have to bring us help from the nirgun, from beyond the gunas, if you will. So try it.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Yes, now we go with another question, Kishore's question.
Kishore is asking, is it sometimes hard for Subal to share the extent of Radha's separation, knowing how it may affect Krishna?
You get to go there and find out about that. I think you have to, otherwise, you look at these examples of these very elevated spiritual interactions between Krishna and his associates through the lens of our human experiences, which they mirror, if you will, or which our human experiences are but reflections of. When we get some insight into them, we can, for the most part, be assured or conclude that that holds such experiences that we have in that regard might hold up. Subal is the expert of all of the people of Braj, of all of the Parshadas of Krishna, all of his associates, the most expert in being able to bring Radha and Krishna together at a time when their love has taken a turn, such that Radha is, for good reason or for no reason, upset with Krishna and unwilling to entertain his overtures to meet. Difficult time for both of them. But of course, this is an example of love, how it moves in a crooked way. Don't get in between, a lover's quarrel by taking one side or another. That's good advice, because they both end up probably not liking you. But in Paul's case, he is in between, and they both end up liking him. So, so it's a little different than the human experience, perhaps. But he's very expert. So, and what was the question exactly to address it?
Subal is able to. Is it hard for Subal sometimes to share the extent of Radha's suffering separation from Krishna, knowing how much Krishna will be affected by knowing that?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I would say that he's expert in what he does, and he will prevail as a result. Some tasks may be more difficult than others, some messages, some conditions more difficult than others to convey. It's a relative thing. His expertise in all these things is to be underscored. Goes to say that there are difficulties in Subal's role, having to disguise himself sometimes as Radha and live in the house of her mother-in-law and pretend that he's her while she goes in his outfit and disguises himself to meet with Krishna. That's pretty difficult. It could be more difficult than that. He has to talk with her. He has to imitate her voice to the mother-in-law, and cook on the stove, and so many. So he's expert. So you should be confident in his expertise. Another question? Radna, any questions there?
Shama Sundar said that he had a question. Oh, okay. Oops. Okay. Okay.
Let's see. Right. I've addressed this kind of question in more broadly recently. Very briefly, I will again. The question is, who's who? Who amongst Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates is who or what in Krishna's Leela, about which there are a number of opinions from learned devotees and associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and the opinions differ at times, and so on and so forth. So there's no absolutes here, other than there's a general consensus that everyone agrees with on somebody. Everybody seems to agree that Rupa Goswami is Rupa Manjari. Not everybody agrees who Ramananda Roy is, or who Advaita Acharya is, and there's a lot of different opinions. And you're free to choose the one that works best for your bhajan, if you know how to do bhajan. And that is that knowing happens to be a factor in that. So just like, for example, if you were to do bhajan and Sakyarasa, then there are different opinions who are the Dwadasa Gopals in Krishna Leela that have appeared in Gaur Leela as associates of Nityananda Prabhu and so forth. There are different opinions over the centuries. And so that may be relative to your bhajan, and then you may choose in ways that work best for that culture of the inner life for you. So that's a liberty that can be taken on the part of a more advanced devotee. Otherwise, there are different opinions. And it's good to know theoretically how they arrive at those, and so forth. And from studying books like Gaur-Ganadeshtipika and others, which there are a number, one can get the spirit of that. That said, yes, in Gaur-Ganadeshtipika, one book that has certain opinions, I believe it is mentioned that Madhavendra Puri is a Kalpa Vriksha tree. Kalpa Vriksha tree means a wish-fulfilling tree. Trees of Braj, they fulfill all desires. Problem is, nobody wants anything except Krishna Prem, and they already have it. It's not really a problem, but it does attract people who think, I could go there and get whatever I want from the tree, let me go. Of course, then as they begin to proceed, they find out what the real wealth is and realize that, as Dhruva Maharaj said, I was looking for a piece of glass and I found a valuable jewel. So there are descriptions of the opulence, if you will, of Braj that include wish-fulfilling trees and cows and so on and so forth. It also means, and the houses are built of jewels and so forth. It means something like, construction materials can be found on the side of the road. And that's how they look at diamonds and emeralds, and they're just rolling around. It's not a big thing, because the real wealth there is the praying. So anyway, aside from that, some introductory thoughts there, or initial thoughts on the overall subject. You ask about Madhavendra Puri. It's said in Gaur-Ganadeshtipika, he's a Kalpa Vriksha tree of Braj. The question is, does that mean he's in Shantaras? Which then the implication is that the questioner has a assumption that the trees of Vrindavan are in Shantarasa. So you have to look at your assumption first. That would be incorrect. Typically, it's been explained by the founding acharyas that Shantaras does not play a role in Braj, but four rasas, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya do. Sometimes Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur may have included Shantaras in some ways and talked about so-called inanimate things along those lines. There may be a way to think about that, but the larger a greater thinking in terms of volume amongst devotees, commentators, acharjas, and so forth, is that these are the four rasas of Braj. And then there's a reason for that, because Shantarasa is typically, as Rupa Goswami explains, has as its object of love, the Vishayalambana, the Paramatma feature, the four-armed form of the Lord. So also in Shantarasa, there's no prema. It is nirmala. It has no sense of possessiveness. It's characteristic of prema. From Shantaras, Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu explains, one through association with someone in Dasyaras or Sakyaras could move from Shantaras to the rasa that corresponds with the powerful association that he's having. That won't happen in Dasyaras or Sakyaras or Vatsalyaras, having attained that Sthayi Bhav. That'll never change. When Uddhava prays to take birth in Braj as a gopi, he's not trying to change his rasa, which is Dasyaras, bundled together with Sakya, and some element of Sakya. He's admiring the intensity of their bhava, and which is that intensity of that bhava will come into his own. So there's no changing of rasas other than the possibility that in Shantarasa, it's kind of a, well, we say it's a rasa, but it's not concerned with the leelas of Krishna. It's not concerned with the qualities of Krishna, associates of Krishna, only the beatific vision of four-armed Narayan. So from that explanation, conclusions have been arrived at as to there are only four rasas in Braj. And so going with that, then we should not assume that a tree in Braj is in Shantaras necessarily. In fact, from the trees and vines are identified with Madhurya Rasa. Hills are identified with Sakya Rasa. Cows are identified with Madhurya Rasa. Vatsalya Rasa, excuse me, I meant to say that. Cows, but clouds are identified with Sakya Rasa. Rain clouds, because they have the same color like Krishna. So their sameness in appearance. And they hold an umbrella over his head from the shade and in the heat of the summer. So there may be some other ways to think about these things, but these are some of the prominent ways in which acharyas have thought about so-called inanimate things or those species other than humans. Now, when you say cows have vatsalya ras, they won't have the full expression of Sakya ras that you could experience in a human form in the Braj Leela. And so holds true, you could say, for the vines or trees that might be identified with Madhurya Rasa. But I think that in a larger sense, what Kavi Karnapur is saying is that it's not that Kavi Karnapur, that Madhavendra Puri is a kalpavriksha. Literally, he is a tree in Vrindavan. He's saying that he is like a kalpavriksha tree. From him, then the desire of our sampradaya can be realized. Touch him, and so Chaitanya Mahaprabhu touched him through Ishwar Puri, and here it begins, and so forth. So I would not look at that as a literal description of Madhavendra Puri, which is to say, and this is true for a number of devotees, not all of them who are mentioned and so forth necessarily even have an identity in Braj. I would say Madhavendra Puri does what it is. He hasn't ventured to say. And for that matter, Madhavendra Puri is a little bit distant from Kavi Karnapur. He's elder. Kavi Karnapur was very young in relation to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very young in relation to Advaita, Acharya, Advaita Acharya, and Mahaprabhu's guru, Ishwar Puri. He's young in relation to them, and they're young in relation to Madhavendra Puri. And so what Kavi Karnapur has done in terms of identifying different devotees in Gaur Leela, who they are in Krishna Leela, what bhavas that we find in them that are similar to the bhavas that are personified in Krishna Leela, is he's asked different opinions and looked at sacred texts and so on and so forth. But this is Madhavendra Puri is more distant. Who even knew him? Rupa Goswami didn't know him. Some say Nityananda was initiated by him, but more likely by Lakshmipati Tirtha. He may have never met Madhavendra Puri, Advaita met. So there's not much to talk, who talked to him, who met him, who felt he was like this, or who did he say anything to somebody? I identify myself like this, or so on and so forth, which we find in some instances and so on. Look at all the material we've presented about Prabhupada expressing his affinities for Sakya Rasa. This is like, that's a whole book of it, one thing after another, after another, after another. So based on that, we have a pretty clear, there's Praman, very clear. This is Prabhupada said about himself. So Puja Panchita Maharaj said the same thing about it. Pramod Puri Maharaj said the same thing. So we can come to a conclusion. Still, it's not universally accepted because people don't listen to all the evidence that's presented for reasons of their own. But that said, I don't think the Kavi Karnapur had at his disposal any measure or amount of information to build a case. Thus, he may have looked at it in this way and just spoke of Madhavendra Puri as like a fountain, a desire tree from which the whole thing comes into the world. Those are my thoughts. And in Shantaras ki jai too, if you want it. Yes, we can only make reasonable conjectures about that. And I would say that many of the devotees who were elders of Mahaprabhu, seniors, the 8 sannyasis that are compared to the root of the metaphorical tree of love of God, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the tree with branches of Advaita and Nityananda, and the fruits are love of God and so forth, this metaphorical tree. The roots, these elderly sannyasis, many of whom were, it would appear, were initiated in the sannyas order through the lineage of Shankar. They have names or sannyas titles that were prominent in the Shankar Sampradaya, like Ashram, Tirtha, Saraswati, Puri, Aranya, Giri, and so forth. I think he had 10 of them, 10 names. Paramananda Puri, Keshava Bharati, and so forth. We know for a fact that Keshava Bharati Maharaj took sannyas in the line of Shankar. Madhavendra Puri, okay, there's a likelihood that he did as well. Now, sometimes he's identified with the Madhva Sampradaya, but in the Madhva Sampradaya, all of the sannyasis are given the title Tirtha. None of the sannyasis that I just mentioned in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's association, the elders, have the title Tirtha. So someone may question, doesn't look like he wouldn't have got the title Puri, the sannyas name, from the Madhva Sampradaya. Therefore, he can't be from the Madhva Sampradaya. Therefore, he's a Mayavadi. Hold on. That would be really jumping ahead considerably. Why? Because in those times, while there were philosophical and theological differences between different sects, they don't seem to have been as strident and as sometimes we find in today's at other times, let's say. So it would not have been out of the ordinary for someone from one sampradaya to have accepted the sannyas order from the Shankar sampradaya necessarily. But that said, and aside from that, there are 4 principal monasteries established by Shankar. And one of them is the Govardhan Math in Puri. In Jagannath Puri, all of the priests who are what are those Brahmins called? No, a certain type of Brahmin. They're the Brahmins from the religious side of the mystical order of Shankar, Advaita Vedanta. Smarta Brahmanas. So they're in charge of all the worship there. They do all the puja. They're Mayavadis. They're affiliated with the Shankar's Math there. Jagannath is accepting offerings from them. Devotees are accepting the prasadam, which is famous, and so on and so forth. You can see what I'm saying here. There's a little more interaction, and differences are there, but they break down at a certain point also, and don't become as big as don't loom as large as we may think they do. That said, in that Puri Math, at one point, the famous Sridhar Swami, commentator on the Bhagavatam, ancient commentator, he is listed in the log there in the books as being the head of the Math. So at one time, Sridhar Swami was the head of the Math in Jagannath Puri of Shankar. It's a pretty big Shankar. Who's ever the head of the Shankar Math now in the 4 months, they'll go on 4 different elephants to the Kumbh Mela. The Shankars here. And it's a big deal. So that was his position. But it's obvious at the same time from his commentary on the Bhagavatam that he departed from the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. And I should add, amongst the 4 maths of Shankar, that math is the one math in which bhakti is emphasized as a means to gyan. Therefore, all the temple worship for Jagannath and so on and so forth. In other words, more typically in the Advaitin Sampradaya, bhakti is for less intelligent people, emotional people, not for sannyasis. It's good. You can factor some bhakti in. It can help you, but so that math emphasizes that to an extreme. So emphasizing bhakti, worshiping Jagannath, it's possible that their ideas could start to change. And it's very apparent from the commentary of Sridhar Swami that this is not an Advaitin commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam. There are Advaitin elements. But Jiva Goswami has reasoned, well, I think that those elements were kept in there to try to serve as bait to bring the Advaitins in the direction of this new found philosophical sensibilities, in which there is Swarup Shakti, in which the form of God is eternal, and so forth. You won't find this in Advaita Vedanta. Therefore, Mahaprabhu at the time very much respected the commentary of Sridhar Swami. Here was Advaitin was very popular, widely circulating, and so forth. I mean, his own sannyas guru was from the Advaitin Sampradaya in some respects, and here was a commentary by a famous Advaitin taking it in another direction that the Goswamis then took and built upon in their commentaries, always referring to Sridhar Swami in their commentaries. But for example, in his Sandarbhas, this is one of the authorities of Jiva Goswami, and he frames it as I said. So those elements of his commentary that are have an Advaitin flavor to them, he's leaving those out. Yeah. So this is his idea, Jiva Goswami's idea. I think it has merit. Given that, I think that there were a number of sannyasis that may have come out of the Puri Mat and been affiliated with the Shankar Sampradaya. And at the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and prior to that as well, there was a huge bhakti revival or whatever, bhakti thrust going on in the subcontinent of India, where the Guru Nanak with the Sikhs, you have, what is his name, Kabir, you have Tukaram, to name a few. Most of them, Tukaram perhaps not, but many of them had a Nirguna concept, a Saguna conception of Nam. They all advocated Nam, Sat Nam, not Sat Nam. That as opposed to what Shankar says, that you have to take birth as a Brahmin and accept sannyas order and all that goes with it, the lifestyle, to attain mukti. They felt, and the people felt, and rightly so, that in their hearts that we can have more direct communication with God. We're his people. we're his Sheshatva. We come from him. And so answering to that kind of unspoken, to some extent, revolt against this monopoly that Shankar and the smartness had on religion and mysticism in many quarters, these revolutionaries came out and emphasized just anybody from anywhere, any caste, chant the name of God, and they directly communicate, have communion with God. So of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's idea was Nirguna Nam as well. So that takes it to another level. And the point is that these ideas were out and about. So these sannyasis, some of them, we could reason, well, Madhavendra Puri was one of them. He came in touch with bhakti, and so he began to culture it. This is what grew in his heart. That at the same time, we may look at him as an eternal associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who he is looked at like that through the lens of other associates of Mahaprabhu. So they would see this as a Leela for this, but he came in this way and had a conversion. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself had a conversion, and his Leela and so on and so forth. So I think that there's that's how I look at Madhavendra Puri's pedigree, if you will. But now I should emphasize here that you can question, how could he? But we can try to give a reasonable explanation, but what we can't deny is that he could. How could he? As if to say, I don't think it's possible. It is possible. Otherwise, how could Mahaprabhu be who he is and receive what he did, at least formally, from Ishwar Puri, who got it from Madhavendra Puri. Madhavendra Puri, if Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, what I got from Madhavendra Puri, then we can't really say, how could he have got that? I don't think he had that. Well, we can't really say that, can we? Because we can see that he got it. And he knows where he got it from. So you can't really make much of an argument about it. It's like, it's obvious that he had it. Where he got it is incidental. It's academic. The reasoning is the opposite reason. He was a Shankar, he didn't have it, therefore it doesn't exist. Therefore, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a sannyasi. He told Ramananda Roy, I'm a Mayavadi sannyasi. He said that in Chaitanya Charitamrita. I heard one Mayavadi Shankar leader, one of the leader contemporaries say that. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself has said, I am a Mayavadi to Ramananda Roy. I wish I was there because I would have said, oh, so you accept that. Then you should accept everything else that's said in Chaitanya Charitamrita. There's quite a bit more there that says that would balance that out, if you will. They use that kind of thing as therefore Chaitanya would actually. Nobody see, you see, they cannot give up Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. No one can reject him amongst these Vedantas and so forth. So they have to find a way to make him part of their group, then at least. We accept Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Yes, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the greatest saint of all of India, we would say. Certainly of all of Bengal. There's no comparison. And in terms of the ecstasy that he displayed, there literally is no comparison cross-culturally with any person who is a better example of the embodiment of divine love of God and the power that's inherent in the name of God. So everybody, has to acknowledge that. They just have to try to tweak him and make him part of their group. He's a Mayavadi. We love him. He's over here, over there. They take him this way and that. So, but they take him one way or the other based on the hagiographies that are written about him by picking and choosing statements that they like this one. But if you take one, then you agree with Krishnadas Kaviraj said this. Krishnadas Kaviraj said, Mahaprabhu said, oh, so you believe Krishnadas Kaviraj only when it's convenient, or is his word good on everything that he said about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Mahashaya Ki Jai, right? So those are a few thoughts which take us just beyond the end of the hour that we have together every Sunday. So it's nice to be with you. I appreciate the question and the earnestness with which it was asked. I'm sure other devotees have had the question and so forth. I hope my answer has been helpful for that and other questions. As I am going to be here now for a few more days. On Thursday, I'm going to depart, and it will not be convenient for me to be on the call next Sunday. I haven't missed a call in 52 weeks, I think. So I'm going to miss next Sunday. So let you know ahead of time, and I think Ananda Kumar will send out a notice to everyone in that regard. But the following week, I will be hopefully available. Jai.
That's good.
Lord,
Thank you. Oh, Gurudev Ki Jai. Thank you for being with us. Thanks, everyone. Let me make some announcements. So just to repeat again, there's going to be no Swami call next Sunday. Let me open my email like I should have earlier. Let me stop the recording. Stamp this.